Welcome to Business in Heels podcast, the podcast that inspires and educates women in business globally to succeed. Now over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode. So joining me on today's show is Chandell Labbozzetta. Chandell, she is a best-selling author, a master trainer of NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. She's a leadership and sales strategist. Now, Life Puzzles has a unique business leadership program, a number of them actually, and they're the only program that is focused on genuine multi-level development that delivers cultural transformations in less than half the time of traditional programs. Now, their programs increase motivation, develop communication skills, and enables companies to become talent magnets through the confidence that their leaders inspire. Now, confidence leads to empowered decisions, wise choices, and profitable transactions, which all businesses want, I'm sure, which help you and your team create the life you want and deserve. Now, specifically on today's show, Chandell is going to share how we can attract, nurture, and build the leaders of tomorrow, how to transform our leadership styles, as well as some techniques to help us increase psychological safety, reduce fear in the workplace, and create lasting shifts in human behaviors. So welcome to the show, Chandell.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's a great pleasure to be here, and what a privilege to have a chat with you today about all things leadership and how we make people feel more empowered in the roles that they're doing to lead others as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. If we have a look at the things that you want to share today in today's marketplace and in today's business world, say 4, 5, 10 years ago, what are some of the differences you see now that if business leaders or leaders of business were not aware of, you need to be aware of this now and the conversation we're about to have? What are some of those differences you're noticing?
Yeah, I think it's really got a lot to do with the fact that we're in a unique time where we're seeing more and more generations in a workplace at any given time. And so one of the key differences and distinctions, I suppose, if we're comparing 5 and 10 years ago to today, is that there's a very diverse way of looking at the world and what constitutes a great day's work and what people value when we're looking at some of the emerging generations like our Z generation, our Y generation, as opposed to comparing to the X generation or the baby boomers as well. And so one of the really challenging things around that is that it's not that one group is right or wrong. The challenge comes the challenge that comes with that is that often there's a lot of disagreement between these things. And what that leads to is a lot of judgment, perhaps a lack of empathy and understanding. And so one of those key things that I think that we could do better as leaders is to, bridge the gap between those things, because there's actually really great things that are potentially from the ways that we used to do business that the X and the baby boomer generation have to share. And there's also lots of really great insights that the newer generations are bringing to the table as well, or the emerging generations.
And so when we have a look then at some of those changes, I'm sure you're going to share some of the tips and insights today are going to help us to know, well, how can we be more engaging and so forth? What are some of the things that we were doing really well in the past and still you see that that's working really well too? Because sometimes we forget to validate, hey, if you're doing this already in the workplace to help you attract those leaders, that's still as important today. Because sometimes as leaders, what we can do, we need to innovate, we need to do things differently. And what we end up doing is adopting new strategies and techniques, but also replacing the things that we really should have kept on doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are so many things that I could choose from right now to speak on. And one of the things that's coming to mind is, making sure that people have an idea of a pathway. And I think with the one-way communication that happens with technology and how so many people are so used to having one-way dialogues with their technology, and as in like monologues, really, as opposed to having live feedback, live conversations. I think one of the things that we did really well in the past that maybe is not as prevalent these days with all of the technology and the remote working solutions is the power of a live conversation for innovation, critical thinking, finding out what's really going on with people. And I think that, the human condition still remains that, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be understood. And I think sometimes when people have objectives that they're trying to achieve, and we're communicating on, much with ourselves, actually, as we type messages to each other, or we send a Teams meeting message, or a text message, or an email, I think sometimes the lost art of conversation and external communication with voice, and actually having live feedback, is just a really powerful thing to attract leaders to know how do they find their pathway, or how to attract emerging leaders and emerging talent to, what will your pathway and your impact be? Whereas often the technology gets in the way of that, and people make assumptions that may not be correct.
Yes, such an important area, I think, especially since in the last 5 years alone, I would say 4 or 5 years, there's been such an advancement in technology, and there always has been,
Yes.
but I think even more so. And it's such a great reminder that, yes, we can use and adopt those, but don't let it bypass something that is very, very important when you're dealing with actual live human beings. So talking about leaders of tomorrow, what often will happen in a business is there are challenges in the marketplace, or sometimes those challenges are a good challenge because there's growth, and you recognize as a business we need to have more team on board. So it's very much reactive rather than proactive. Not all the time, but I think as businesses, not only do we need to navigate and ensure we can get through what's happening today and in the immediate future, but also having a plan at the back of our mind for longer term. So when it comes to attracting, nurturing, and building the leaders of tomorrow, what are some key things we need to know here, Chandell?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a structure of progression. And one of the key things that we're seeing that's different now compared to how it used to be is, I think the word management is definitely out the door, and a lot of individuals are not really happy to be managed, but they're very, very happy to be coached. And so, it's almost like the management hat has been taken off, and we've all become coaches, where we're looking to nurture, collaborate, and work together with people to align what is their personal and professional goals, as well as the business that they represent's goals. And how can we make sure that we're tapping into both? Because ultimately, I meet so many leaders all the time. How do I motivate my team, Chandell? How do I motivate my team? Well, actually, we can't motivate anyone. What we can do is we can inspire an inner drive, an inner connection to, when I do this, then I'll achieve that. And what's in it for me is X, Y, and Z. And so I think the way in which we can attract talent is to make sure that people recognize and can have transparency around, well, when I'm contributing this way to this organization, here's where the win-win is for me in my personal life, for my family, for the things that I value, as well as feeling that fulfillment. And I think that often there are businesses that they map all of those things out at a board level, or at a HR level, or a senior level, but they're not always communicated really well through the frontline leaders, through middle management. So that's where that dialogue comes in again, and having those conversations and working together with that talent around being able to have that visibility around, well, this is my pathway, these are my milestones, and here's how I can feel accomplished along the way.
Do you find, Chandell, that when you have an organization that has different age groups, that the pathway that you've just described tends to be very important for a younger generation, or you're finding that it's important across the spectrum?
I really think I can see how sometimes people might think that this is more about early careers or emerging talent. The reality is that there are many people that, they might be capable of retiring, but they realize that they actually feel quite passionate about their work, and they want to have purpose in what they're doing. And so I don't necessarily think that it's specific to one age group, or one demographic, or one generation as such. In many cases, we can find amazing talent that might be in the X generation, or moving into, that sort of last stages of their career, where they've still got so much to offer, and actually having a pathway to know where is their next level of being able to offer that value to the future generations coming through, or through innovation from experience. So I actually think it's really more important to be able to know what is the individual goals of the people, and how can we harness the talent that they have to offer and align that with what their goals and objectives are as well.
Yes. You know, there's a couple of phrases and words that you used, and I want to really just pinpoint those because I think it's so important. It is always, again, always has been, but I think if organizations don't recognize that and, again, create an environment in which this really is at the forefront, we may lose a really good team, no matter what age group or stage they're at in their career. And that is about fulfillment and purpose. That's really important, isn't it? Not, going to work, yes, but feeling that you're contributing to something. And I think yesteryear's workplaces can sometimes have failed to pinpoint that. This is just a job, do it, and then go home at the end of the day. But we really want to feel fulfilled that we're contributing, yes?
Absolutely, and I think it's something that the emerging generations have taught us as such, because there's lots of words like, I want to make an impact, I want to be, delivering value, I want to feel like I'm contributing to something that's bigger than me. And often when I'm doing coaching with emerging leaders, so the people that are coming through and sort of entering, an emerging leader role, they use phraseology like that. And then when we start to delve a little bit deeper to understand what that means to them, this is where they struggle sometimes to be able to define what that is. And I think this is where the organizations that people work or that the organizations themselves could actually provide the pathways for the managers and the mid-managers to actually share. This is the demonstration of an impact. This is how you can contribute, and here's how it will actually help you to not only progress your career, but also to add value to the things that are important to you. And so I think that whatever age group or whatever, generation, I think that the human condition is that we largely are emotional beings. And so when we don't feel good,
women, often
yes, exactly.
Women have emotions. Well, men are just as emotional. They show it a different way, don't they?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And we all have, being a human being is largely to be emotional. And I think in some ways our workplaces have championed the idea of mental well-being and mental health. And in other ways, potentially we've actually added a little bit of damage to this with all the awareness of mental health and mental well-being, in the sense that I think sometimes people will look at their emotions and potentially, expect not to have any, especially in the context of business. When in actual fact, our emotions are just feedback mechanisms and drivers that let us know that we're on track, or that if we need to make a change, or if we need to have a conversation, or whether something's okay or something's not okay. And I think being able to, balance how that shows up, especially in the attainment of goals and fulfillment in the workplace, it actually reminds me a little bit of, the language of appreciation work by Paul White and Gary Chapman, where they actually looked at the 5 languages of appreciation. And most people will leave organizations because they don't feel appreciated. And I suppose in another way, we could say that they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, and they don't feel understood. And certainly if they don't feel those things, then they certainly won't be feeling like they're making an impact.
Yes, and it's interesting when you talk about those. Gary Chapman's also written the 5 love languages, and in the languages of appreciation, someone may have a different way of expressing appreciation, and if it's not the way, your primary way of receiving, there may be an expression of appreciation, but kind of in a different language, if that makes sense. So you may be very appreciated. But what this pinpoints is something that you said earlier. It's important to have conversations one-on-one, in a group, or a support mechanism, that if someone is not able to define what they want, because we're very good at defining what we don't want. I don't like this. Well, what do you want? I don't really know, but this is not it. If we help them to put some language around it, some definitions around it, then we can all work together to ensure that that is there. And my goodness, I'm pretty sure that organizations who champion these kind of programs will find gifts, talents, strengths in their employees that they had no idea, and the individual team member probably had no idea either. So that really helps build that plan, that program or that pathway of progression across the organization. Yes.
Yes, 100%. And I think it's about getting clear on what the pathway opportunities are. And I was actually just yesterday having a conversation with one of our clients about this in terms of, what is the pathway and the opportunities available for people. And it's not always linear. I think that these are collaborative discussions. As you said, they're discussions, they're dialogues. What we want to discourage is the idea of monologues all the time, where we're just conversing with a device, or we're just looking at text on a screen, or, not including, multi-sensory learning or communications that allow us to, really collaborate and create ideas. So I think it is important to be able to define what those opportunities are, but then also to communicate them and to collaborate with the individuals that will be going on that pathway, to see whether there are those touch points, whether there's a connection to those things. And certainly when we look at the multi-generational workspaces, we definitely see that what some of the more equipped or more experienced generations might do is they'll try and decide what they think the younger generations want, and then they get upset about the fact that they're not engaging with that, which is where communication comes in again.
You should ask them, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's ask. Have you asked? Yeah, great.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
what a rich conversation that we've just had, and that was like kind of point one. We could continue to unpack that, but what I would like to do is now kind of look at the next point you want to talk about, is transforming your leadership style. Before we dive into that, one of the things that I think is very apparent, and we often don't remind individuals, no matter what stage or age they're at within the workplace, is that we all have the ability to be a leader where we are. We often think leaders, as you said, managers, although we need to revisit that, and senior leaders and so forth. But everybody has, I would imagine, an impact, an influence with the people around them. So talk a little bit about that, and also what are some things that we can start to do, no matter where we're at in the organization, to transform our leadership styles?
Yeah, I think I hope the audience will stay with me on this, because it may seem a little controversial. I think that all leadership starts with self-leadership, to be honest with you. And at Life Puzzle, we say that, sales and influence is the number one life skill. And so a lot of people might be reacting and going, well, I'm not a salesperson, this doesn't apply to me. So just bear with me for a second. But when we think about this, there are three important sales that people make. The first sale, or the first influence you have, is over yourself, your mindset, and whether or not you have the conviction to follow through on the things that are important to you. Do you believe in yourself? Do you feel confident to step up? And if we can't nail that sale with ourselves, then it's really difficult to do the other two. And the second sale is the sale of influence. And I often joke with parents and say, if you're a parent, you know that bedtime is a sales conversation. It's just a question of, does the child win the sale or do you? And so to me, sales is about influence. And as a leader, when we've got people in our teams, we need to be able to be convincing that our ideas should be seen, heard, championed, etc. And that's leading up as well as leading down potentially. So whether it's the people that report into you, or whether you're selling to the board or to your superiors, it's really important that you have conviction in being able to showcase an idea or to get people enrolled in that idea. And so that's the second sale. And then, of course, the third sale is the transactional one, which is about being able to build value in a product or service or a proposal, etc. And so when we think about this idea of how do we take steps to be a leader, Anne-Marie, one of the things that we really need to be thinking about is, if someone in my team was doing the behaviors that I'm doing, would that be something that I would respect? Would I want to follow that? Am I demonstrating to myself the respect to myself that potentially, I would give to another manager, or that I would expect someone in my team to actually do with me as a first point? And I think a lot of the time people are not necessarily, showing up with that belief, that mindset, etc. And I think also too, one of the other things that's really important is being willing to, ask good quality questions, and to ensure that we're not getting stuck on ideas from the past, if that makes sense, or limitations about the future that hasn't happened yet. So I think it's that willingness to actually take ownership is the very first thing that we can do, regardless of whether you're an emerging leader or an existing leader, or someone who really wants to step up to the next level. I mentioned before about the difference between management and coaching. And I think that communication and that conversation, coaching is a do with process, whereas management often is seen as a do to process. And so, we can talk a little bit about transformational leadership if that's something that you'd like to unpack a bit further.
I think so, because I love the way that you said there's 3 parts to that, and it starts with self, and how often we don't recognize that, and it really doesn't allow us to address appropriately any situation, because we always tend to, and it's a human behavior, is look at, well, they're doing this or this or that. We look externally
Yes.
for the reasons why, but if we looked internally first, how am I contributing to that? We can, it changes the dynamics, doesn't it? Because we realize, look, there is a level of control even that we have on this situation, even if that means we say, you know what, I'm actually going to leave this conversation because of whatever it might be. So let's talk about some of those transformational leadership, because I think that can be so empowering in a world where there is so much stuff going on in the workplace. It brings lots and lots of challenges around this whole, how do we communicate? How do we engage? Guess what? It starts with self.
Totally. And, one of my favorite phrases is that when you point the finger out there are 3 fingers pointing right back at us. And so I think one of the things that we see a lot of the time is that ownership piece and, first starting with self. But one extra piece in it is, as we look at when I point the finger out there are 3 pointing back at me. I need to ask myself, if the meaning of the communication is the response that you get, and I'm not getting the response that I would like to get, then how can I be more flexible in my communication? And this speaks a lot to what we call transformational leadership. And in the past, a lot of leaders, and also now, there's a lot of leaders that do what we call transactional leadership. So it's sort of like, I'm going to delegate something, which in most cases, by the way, is abdication. So people sort of hand something over and go, here you go, you take this over now, and I'll check it to make sure it's right. And so they go off to go and check that. And before you know it, people get to about 12 people on their team, and they're just constantly checking people's work, or worse than that, they've handed something over, it didn't get done as they would have liked, and so then they take it back on themselves. So we've got lots of people on the team that potentially have a sense that they're not contributing, or that they're not good enough, or any of those imposter syndrome type things. I always call it the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on your shoulder and tell you why you're no good. So we've got people on the team who potentially don't feel like they're actually able to add value, when really, if we take it back to the root cause, often it was a transactional management conversation instead of one where we actually empower the leader to understand the objectives, the measure of efficiency, what does a great outcome look like, and then what support do you need in order to be able to make that happen. And so I think one of the great methods to be able to do that, if you're a leader that's handing something over, is to make sure that, we can talk, protocols and SOPs and all those sorts of things. But I love the see one, do one, teach one method, which is really about making sure that people have the opportunity to observe something, that they can do one with some support. And through the process of teaching, they usually retain about 95% of the information. So it's a much more effective, transformative handover and delegation process, which then allows leaders to actually coach and spend time helping their team members to build their goals.
Yes. And a team leader who may not really have adopted such an approach, if they're thinking, well, that's just going to take ages, actually, I would dare say it doesn't, because once you've got kind of a bit of a system or a framework in place, it just rolls, doesn't it? You check in, there's that dialogue and exchange of communication. But what ends up happening is, because it is from that collaborative empowerment approach, you don't then have the potential for that, that person who is now in charge of completing that task to come back, or he or she knows exactly what it is that he or she is doing. And I think that that's really what you're saying. Give your team member the best possible approach with tools, expectations, and all of that, so that they know that they are contributing because of the task they're completing. Yes, and you don't have to put out the fires and constantly check to make sure the job's being done right.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think a lot of the time the shortcuts are made because people look at that process, just as you said there, Anne Marie. I think what can happen is people look at that process and they go, I'm too busy. I might as well do it myself. I don't have time to do those things. And, for full transparency for our listeners, I think that it really is about slowing down to speed up, because you're making a slightly more, you're investing slightly more time in the beginning, but you're also not losing time over and over again as you fix mistakes or put out fires, as you said. And so I think that sometimes we call it the first 15%. If you actually invest in the first 15%, then you get the payoff in the long run. And sometimes people don't recognize that. They just sort of, stay in the being busy mode, and, they often will validate the beliefs that they can't delegate, or that people in their team are not efficient or not capable. And then that leads to other domino effects on people's self-esteem and their willingness to contribute.
Yes, and that leads to the third point about how it's important in the workplace to have that psychological safety, the reduction of fear in the workplace to create lasting shifts in human behavior. And so if you're a leader that just kind of throws work and expects someone to do the job and not be able to ask questions and all of the things that we just spoke about, unknowingly you may be creating an unsafe workplace, because there's
Yes.
nothing worse than tiptoeing around a boss or completing something and thinking, I hope this person's not going to bite my head off because I'm working within the parameters, sparse
Yes.
that they were, and untapped or unaddressed, that can lead to a team members not doing the best for the leader. So share a little bit more about what are some things that we can recognize may be happening that, hang on, this workplace, if you don't address something, this has the potential to really spiral out of control. And then what are some things that we need to do?
Yeah, I think when we have these experiences where perhaps maybe I've attempted to do something. Let's say I'm an emerging leader. I've been given a task to do. I attempted to do it, albeit I didn't get too much instruction. I make a big mistake. I get reprimanded for it. I get told about all the things that I should have noticed. And that then sends me into a place where I haven't been given any information around how to fix it or how to grow it or how to do it differently next time. What that generally does for a lot of people when we see this happen in a workplace is that they'll actually constrict what they put their hands up for, because they're afraid of making mistakes. And while I think it's really important that we make it safe for people to make a mistake and set parameters, of course we don't want to send people with not enough information that they make costly mistakes or dangerous mistakes. But I think it's a mindset of the leader to actually empower people and give them permission to, one, ask the questions that they need to ask to ensure that they're getting, that they've got enough to start, get the readbacks to see whether or not there's any information and what they understood from the handover. But more importantly, to remind people that, it's okay if you don't get it 100% right the first time. This is what we're expecting you'll be able to do. And as you build your confidence, and one of my favorite sayings is that trust is built by small agreements being made and kept over time, but confidence is also built by small actions being completed and repeated over time. So couple of little things that we can do to actually assist our teams. One, cancel the idea that micromanagement is a bad thing. Micromanagement, when someone has never done anything before, is welcomed, because people need to feel safe that they have enough information that they can do the task without making mistakes. So tell them what to do. It's really important. If somebody's doing something for the first time, give them the instruction that they need, give them the hand-holding that they need. Don't continue to do that after they've done it 100 times. Of course, then that's inappropriate micromanagement. But I think we've got such a terrible stigma around micromanagement that we actually just went away from teaching anyone how to do anything. And so, make sure that you give people the specific instructions that they need and give them the support that they need. But then also, I think the other thing that we need to do as we move beyond that is to also give people permission to ask questions. And one of the great things that we can do is a method that's adapted from the Socratic coaching method, which obviously Socrates was a person who asked a lot of questions of his students. He never really taught. He just believed that people had the answers within inside themselves. And so if we ask the right questions, then they'd find the answers. So once people understand how to do a task and we're ready to start the coaching journey, then the importance of asking questions and helping people to find those answers, whether it's through the 1-3-1 problem solving method, one problem, 3 possible outcomes, and which one would you choose? Giving people that sense of empowerment gives them confidence over time. And also, I think giving feedback as well. So it's not just about giving feedback that's compliments and affirmation when people are doing well. It's also being willing to have the courage to have those radical candor conversations where we're sharing the truth about, this is what you did really well. I think this is what you could potentially look at next time as an improvement strategy. And also, what do we do moving forward? What's the next step of development for you? So always projecting for the future and what's the next step, I think, is really important.
Yes, so important. I mean, you spoke a lot today about so many incredible things that I think once we start implementing those for ourselves, and creating that, supportive, collaborative environment for our team, we will really start to notice some significant changes. And I think, because we're dealing with individuals and things happen, don't they? So one day there might be certain circumstances that just requires a little bit more patience, and empathy.
Yes.
That's going to happen all of the time. But I think leadership, development of self, development of others, it never stops, no matter what stage, age, size of business. I think it's an ongoing thing. And it's good though, because it always ensures that we're consistently and continuously being the best and supporting others and doing that too. Yes.
Absolutely. And I think if we can be a little bit better than we were yesterday, then and do that every day, then that's all about that progress. And I often say to people, there is no summit. If you think that there's some sort of arrival point where that you've arrived, then that's when you'll be disappointed. I think life is always interesting when there's the opportunity to continue to grow, continue to learn. And so as long as we're providing people of any age, of any generation, of any workplace or any industry, the opportunity to keep showing up and with options to keep being a slightly better version of themselves tomorrow than they were yesterday, then we'll certainly be winning the war on talent. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Life Puzzle, we've got that name there on your title there, and we've mentioned it in the introduction. But as we're completing today's interview, what is the best way for people to reach out if they've listened to what you've said and say, oh, look, we'd love to find out more about the programs that Chandell might be able to bring to our organisations? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, look, well, I believe in the show notes we have a little gift for everybody. So you can download a copy of my book, Confident Closing, which isn't just a book about sales. It's very much about the idea of being able to share ideas and bridge together the psychology and the strategy of how we succeed in business. And we've also got another gift of the 10 critical competencies of leadership that aren't as common as you think they used to be. So that's probably the best way to reach out to us, and we can connect with you through there or via lifepuzzle.com.au.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and all the best to everybody who's listening.